Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Broadband Heroes. And we have one hell of a hero with us today. We're super excited to have Gigi on. We have lots to talk about. We also have Mr. Brian Hollister from Bonfire with us. But before we do that, just introduce myself, Nick Dinsmore, Broadband Heroes, and my co-host,
Jade Pirates de Carvalho. Happy to be here with everyone today and excited to hear from Gigi.
All right, awesome. Well, let's do quick introductions. Brian, we'll start with you, and then we'll jump to Gigi. Just who the heck are you?
My name is Brian Hollister. I'm the CEO of Bonfire Infrastructure Group, and we work with municipalities, counties, tribal nations, and helping them figure out how to solve broadband challenges in their communities. So our team works on, feasibility, planning, engineering, construction, and in some cases, open access operations.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And Gigi, I would say you need no introduction because I don't know if you're notorious, infamous. I don't know what, but you are definitely a hero in the broadband space. So why don't you introduce yourself?
So hi, everybody, and I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm very, very honored to be considered a broadband hero. My name's Gigi Sohn. I'm a longtime public advocate for universal connectivity of all kinds. If I can date myself, I started out trying to get broadcasters and cablecasters to serve their communities and be open to a variety of voices. And having failed at that, thank the Lord for the internet, because it took the power, it took the medium out of command and control, central power, and into the public's hands. And so for the last, I guess, almost 25 years now, I've been trying to ensure that everybody in the United States and sometimes internationally has access to affordable, robust broadband.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Well, like every time we try to talk to broadband heroes, we'd like to understand the history, and part of understanding context and where you're going forward is understanding where you came from. And it would be great if you could maybe just help us understand what is your origin story. How did you get into this business, and what inspired you to go into a space that can sometimes be pretty brutal?
Yes. So as I said before, I'm going to date myself again. I studied broadcasting and film at the Boston University. It was called at the time the School of Public Communication. It's now called the College of Communication. And I originally wanted to be a sportscaster. And as, again, many people know, I'm a huge sports fan and particularly delighted that the Mets made the playoffs. We'll see how they do. But I wanted to be a sportscaster. I wasn't particularly good at that. And I took a broadcasting law class. I wasn't even broadcasting in cable. So this is like the early 80s. And I really learned there about the power of the broadcast medium at the time, or the media at the time, to shape public opinion. And also the role of government in ensuring that the media was open to differing viewpoints. And that really kind of got me going. And after I graduated from law school, I joined a small public interest law firm called the Media Access Project that worked. I was there for almost 12 years, trying to make both broadcasting and then cable, which kind of came online around in the early 80s, mid 80s, 1984 particularly was when the Cable Act was passed, trying to make them more open to differing voices, trying to get the government to adopt policies that would ensure that those entities that were tasked with being fiduciaries for the public actually did so. I can't say we succeeded. It was very tough during, Reagan, Bush, and even Clinton times to get that done. And then I got a chance to go to the Ford Foundation and actually fund a lot of the advocates in this space. And that's when the internet was starting to come online, and that really changed everything. And as I said before, for the past almost, 24, 25 years, I've been trying to get broadband internet access in people's hands so that they can have a voice and that we don't have to necessarily rely on gatekeepers for all of our information. Now, of course, we could talk about how the internet didn't necessarily fix that.
There's pros and cons of everything, right?
Yes, but I still think that the internet has made life a lot better for hearing from a diversity of voices than three broadcast networks and a handful of cable operators. So, it's got its problems, But I like this world a lot better than the three network world.
Yeah, for sure. So
Seems
Brian,
like a
Jay,
real
I mean,
parallel track there of advocacy, always that common thread of trying to speak up for voices that might be excluded.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my whole career, right? And trust me, I've lost a lot more than I've won. And I'm not even talking about my nomination to the FCC. I'm just talking about, it's been a tough policy world on a bipartisan basis. I would say it was not until President Obama took office where there was a real openness to really looking at how you regulate the media in the way that promotes democracy and openness.
So I guess Brian and Jade, since you know Gigi as well and have seen the work and you guys are in this space, what's the superpower you think she has? We always like to hear from the outside, like what superpower is she exhibiting to help pursue the mission of getting broadband in the hands of more people?
I mean, from my perspective, I think Gigi is really helping to educate, communities on what's possible and helping them understand that they're probably at a point of making one of the biggest decisions, of their political careers. And it's there's some really good answers here. But the challenge you have is what I've really seen is the risk that communities are scared to take on. But in fact, communities are in the very best position to actually solve these problems. But the communities, have to get involved. And if they don't, then they're losing their opportunity really to have some type of control of their digital future. And I think Gigi is just the superpower, is constantly, charging towards talking with anyone that will listen, right? And what we're seeing out there is it's actually a lot more work than we thought. So that's why we're very supportive and supporting the organization that Gigi's behind, because I think a lot of folks out there are trying to figure it out. And it's really hard to get good partnerships and the right ones because it's a big lift. There's no doubt this is not easy work by any means, but there's definitely a path, and I think she's killing it and needs all the help that she can get, and we're right there behind her.
Maybe you need
Yeah.
maybe you need the helmet, the superhero part of your costume as a helmet, so you can just.
Exactly. Yeah, I have my superhero thing that you
Cut
created for the show. Maybe you got to get me some type of helmet or some battle armor, because sometimes that's what it is. You're going and trying to help these communities, and then they're getting educated from all sorts of interest, and the majority of them are not necessarily in the best interest of the community. In order for the community to really be able to have a shot at ubiquitous coverage.
I definitely echo that. Communities don't know what they don't know, and you help them understand what's possible. But you also have a really high tolerance for uncomfortable conversations and policy ideas and inserting your voice into areas where people maybe don't want to accept that things could be different. But what Brian really, I think, is talking about is your work now with AAPB. So I don't know if we wanted to kind of shift to that and tell us what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I did fail to say that I wear a lot of different hats now, but I'd say my two main hats are as the executive director of the American Association for Public Broadband, which promotes communities owning their own broadband infrastructure. And that's where I've worked very closely with the folks at Bonfire. And also, I work with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society as a senior fellow and public advocate, where we do a lot of work that actually overlaps with what I do at AAPB, but it's all in the service of getting broadband to everybody. If I could just talk a little bit about the superpower, because I actually think my superpower is listening to people and hearing what they have to say. Despite the sometimes caricature of me, I actually can get a bunch of people from all different sides of a policy issue in a room and get them to agree or at least find consensus on some things. I just worked on a project around local broadband permitting. Jade, you weren't able to come to that event. We got 30 very disparate voices, and we got them to agree on a bunch of solutions to getting more effective permitting at the local level for broadband. So I think that's actually what I do best is actually I listen to people, I hear what they have to say. It doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily agree with them, but at least I acknowledge, okay, you have a legitimate viewpoint. Let's see how we can find consensus.
That's a great
That's what makes you
power to have.
That's why it's a superpower, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into obviously the policy part of this, right? So some of the issues that are front and center today, you brought about education. We've talked a little bit about trying to convince people of different ways to do things, but obviously this is a time in history we've never had before. So, from your perspective, what do you think the big challenge to overcome right now? And obviously we're in an election cycle, we're in lots of stuff going on. And I mean, we joke, but I mean, we have allies and villains, right? There's opposing forces on all sides, even though broadband's supposed to be more agnostic, so to speak. What do you think is really the biggest challenge right now?
Well, there's multiple challenges, right? You have the access challenge, right? Are the communities that have broadband? There's the affordability challenge. Can people afford it? Is cost a barrier? And then, of course, there's the adoption challenge, right? So that's digital literacy, that's trust. So there's actually a lot of challenges. But when you talk about barriers, to me, the biggest barriers to overcoming those challenges are policies that favor the large incumbents and restrict public broadband. With the right policies, and I know, my friends in the administration, they're trying very, very hard and they're under a lot of pressure, but I still fear, and I'm talking about obviously the BEAD program here, that some of the pressure from the large incumbents is going to, make the BEAD program such that mostly large incumbents can participate. I'm hearing it more and more every single day. I'm very concerned about it. And, I hope my friends and former colleagues at NTIA are listening to folks that want to participate and feel that because of the short time frames. I know this is not what Republicans are saying, right? But the fact that state broadband offices have to have all their grants lined up within a year of their grant proposal being approved is going to be a huge barrier to smaller places participating. The letter of credit issue, while I thought we had a victory on that, and I played a very large role in getting 300 entities, including Jade, to sign a letter to NTIA saying you need to have alternatives. Public broadband entities cannot get a letter of credit of any kind, and they don't believe they should even have a performance bond. And NTIA has the flexibility to let public broadband entities kind of off the hook. Also, the surety community actually put together a package of surety bonds, and we're trying to get NTIA to not necessarily put a stamp of approval on it, but at least say, okay, this is pretty good. This is something that states could put in their contracts. And it's just very, very hard to get their attention. Now, I understand the pressure they're under. They're getting slapped because they're being told they're moving too slowly. I can talk about that for days. Blame Congress, not NTIA. And they're getting blamed for requiring low-cost broadband plans for BEAD winners, which, again, Congress mandated. So I understand why maybe they're not focusing on the things that I care about a lot. But, again, I care about getting competition in the program. And right now, the way things are going, I fear that's not going to happen.
Where should the advocacy be right now then? I mean, you mentioned there's a lot of different players here. Where should the business side, the government side, where should we be pushing more advocacy and more help?
Well, everywhere, right? Obviously at NTIA, obviously at Congress, when it comes to the affordability issue, I do not believe the Affordable Connectivity Program will be extended, but there has been this universal service fund reform working group that's been working now for a year and a half and still has not popped out any language. I think because that could be the place for the ACP, right? The $30 subsidy replacement. Got to put pressure on them to do something. And the states, right? There's still 16 states that restrict or prohibit communities from building public broadband. So Colorado lifted theirs about a year and a half ago. Thank you to Governor Polis and a legislature that gets it. Minnesota, thank you, Governor Walz, just lifted theirs, but there's still 16 left. And those, the ISPs in those communities or communities that might want to build a public broadband network and use BEAD money for it, well, they can apply for BEAD money. They just can't build the network, right? So those restrictions are really, really terrible. And I think that every chamber of commerce and every educational institution and every mayor and every state that has those restrictions should go to the state legislature and say, you're killing our economy by not letting us do that.
Gigi, I think that's one of the benefits of maybe the program moving more slowly than people would like, is that all these things that are rising to the surface as potential barriers to success, we do have an opportunity to advocate for changes. And I think the NTIA is open to changes on, letter of credit, surety, et cetera. They want it to be successful. I think state legislatures just don't fully understand the problem. They have a few lobbyists in their ears, but if more of the public could help educate them. To me, I tend to be an optimist, but I think there's still time. And that is one of, again, the silver linings of how long the program is taking to roll out, that, problems we couldn't even identify in the original crafting of the guidance are rising to the top.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually said to Assistant Secretary Davidson, who's a good friend, I think is doing an excellent job. I said, I know you're getting hit over the head for moving too slow, but I think you're moving too fast, for reasons stated, Jade. And two things I worry. Well, one thing I really, really worry about is once the BEAD money has been spent, that states will get rid of their state broadband offices.
Yeah.
And I think that is an absolute mistake. There's got to be an entity that oversees the promises made by the BEAD grantee winners. We don't want another Rural Digital Opportunity Fund or RDOF situation where you have people sitting on money and not building networks. So I think that's really, really important. Let me put a pitch in for one other thing since we're talking about the states. The Benton Institute runs a monthly meeting called State Connections, and it's for state legislators who want to learn more about broadband. And the sort of the lead legislator right now is a gentleman, Missouri representative named Lewis Riggs, very conservative Republican, but cares deeply about broadband competition. And I urge everybody who knows a state legislator, who wants to learn more about broadband, and people ask some of the most basic questions. There's no dumb questions. There's some people that really know this stuff, and there's some people that know nothing. I urge you, get in touch with me, Sohn at aapb.us, and I'm happy to hook you up with the State Connections people. It's a really important program, and I think it's really helping state legislatures learn about why broadband is so critical to their communities.
I guess on that note, why don't we zoom out a little bit and just, you mentioned the Universal Service Fund, the Affordable Connectivity Program, and the issues around those. Why don't we zoom out just maybe, and anybody, let's explain what that is to people that maybe don't know what those programs actually do.
So which one would you like me to talk about first?
Either one.
So the Affordable Connectivity Program was adopted by a bipartisan Congress as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And it was a $14.2 billion, $30 a month subsidy, $75 if you live in the high-cost area or tribal lands, to eligible households. And there was low-income households mostly. It was 200%. You had to meet the 200% of the federal poverty level. There were a bunch of other ways you could qualify. And it was adopted by 23 million households, which is huge. It's still actually less than half of the eligible households, but still a huge program. And it basically ran out of money. And despite, the good efforts of, again, bipartisan members of Congress, including Vice Presidential candidate Vance and Peter Welch of Vermont, who's wonderful, really, the two of them really led the charge, Congress could not see fit to pass it. And I know there are people that want to blame one party or another, but blame, in my opinion, is bipartisan. I don't need to get into the details of why I think that. I'll just say it is a national shame that this has not happened. So we need to find alternatives. So one alternative would be to expand the FCC's, the Federal Communications Commission's Universal Service Fund. So the Universal Service Fund is funded by a fee on your phone bill, not your broadband bill, your phone bill. So your mobile, so this, and I actually have a landline, I'm embarrassed to say, for spam calls and for when my mother calls, right? So it's a fee on interstate revenues, and obviously those revenues are shrinking. And there's 4 programs. There's the high cost program, which goes to build networks in rural areas. There's the rural healthcare program that obviously goes to connect hospitals and healthcare facilities in rural areas. There's the Lifeline program, which is a $9.25 subsidy, very tiny, that mostly goes for mobile phones. I mean, you can't really buy broadband with that kind of money. And E-rate, which goes to connect schools and libraries. So the FCC is continuing to spend money and actually expanding the number of things it spends money on using this shrinking universal service fund, but is not willing to get more revenues in. It's something we tried to get the FCC to do, but have failed so far. So that's why Congress, unless we get a new FCC leadership that is willing to expand the amount of money that comes in addition to the amount of money that goes out, if we ever see the Universal Service Fund as a place to replace the ACP $30 subsidy, we're going to either need Congress to act or new FCC leadership.
Gigi, why has it been such a challenge to be able to do anything on a broadband connection? I mean, there's so many. Why is it still associated with voice? And what's been that hurdle? I mean, why voice? Why is, it's never been able to break off of it? There's so many broadband connections. It seems like it should include them. What has been the hurdle? I mean,
what is so funny is that even the broadband providers, or at least some of them, like the telecoms, the cable companies are not so hip on it, right? Well, not all the cable companies. I don't want to be too broad. There are some cable companies that are like, of course, broadband should pay in, right? And I think if you talk to the AT&Ts and Verizon of the world, they'll say that as well. But they'll also say, well, we think that big tech should pay in. Now, my feeling is I want this fund to be as fat as possible. So Universal Service Fund was originally conceived as a general tax, right? So there's no edict from God saying it's got to be just a telecommunications provider. So if Congress wants to consider expanding, now the FCC obviously cannot apply the fee to anybody other than telecommunications providers and voice providers. They can't. Congress wants to consider making that fund bigger and applying it to other entities. I don't think it should just be big tech. I think if we consider applying it more broadly, maybe it ought to be big data. Maybe it ought to be, so my colleague, Benton colleague, John Horrigan, and former FCC Chief of Staff Blair Levin just came out with a piece today in Benton calling to assess a fee on online gambling. I love that idea. So, Blair has also talked about, having Medicaid pay. I talked to a state broadband, it wasn't a leader of a state office, but somebody who runs a state broadband coalition, industry coalition in Mississippi. And he said, well, I'm looking at TANF funds, right? So that's temporary assistance for needy families. So, there are other ways to kind of, skin the onion. But it will take vision, it will take courage, and it will take leadership. I think the most obvious way is for the FCC to handle it. But again, the chairwoman believes, I think wrongly, that expanding the contribution base to broadband will necessarily raise prices on consumers. And as a result, she will not move forward. So again, unless we have a change in leadership, or Congress does something with this Universal Service Fund working group that has been, again, deliberating now for a year and a half, we may have to look at other places. I love the gambling idea.
That's a great idea. Do you think, I'm just curious, I mean, of all those different options, do you still think that there's a problem with people understanding the value of broadband? Because I mean, you mentioned where you can pull these monies from, but that indicates people that have vision and understand how important broadband is to life.
I mean, I always I'm such a simpleton. And, when we built this massive highway system that clearly has been so important that everything that gets trucked across it has to pay taxes. I mean, it just seems so logical that the internet is very similar, right? And we have to continue to invest in it and build it and get it done, right? Like the highway system. I mean, Get it done.
I hope we don't need another pandemic for people to realize how important broadband is. I'll
No,
never forget, like March 13th, that was like the day everything shut down. It was a Friday. It was a Friday the 13th. And my phone, I was just sort of like an advocate at large, right? And my phone started ringing off the hook because reporters were like, oh my God, how are people going to study from home? People know the value proposition,
Yeah.
right? But again, the lack of vision, both, in the agency and at the congressional level, and courage to move forward. The pandemic's the reason we got the BEAD program, right?
Right.
And we got ACP. But to continue that, it takes real courage, it takes real dedication, it takes not looking at the political clock, right? And that's a big part of the problem, right? Well, we don't want, it's the elections coming up. We don't want, Republicans, we don't want Democrats to get wins. We have to get back to what's good for the public. And again, the grand irony of this all is that it's good for everybody.
Exactly.
It's great for red states. It's great for blue states. Like, so what are we doing here? It's extraordinarily frustrating, Brian. And I'll tell you what is also doubly frustrating is until the ACP was like in the grave, I couldn't get the press to write about it. Like we got the trade press, which is all well and good, and the same 1,500 people read it.
Right.
But, try to get the New York Times to cover this issue. Impossible. Try to get the Los Angeles Times. Try to get, any major newspaper. The Post has actually been pretty good on it to cover the fact that, that there are tens of millions of households that don't have broadband or are subscription vulnerable. So they'll be able to have it some months and not months. It's nearly impossible. And it's frustrating.
In my opinion, ACP is really showing the need for the affordability component. It's going to be very, very, very hard to solve that if the public's not involved, right? I don't know how you solve it if the public community is not involved in some aspect of their destiny. They have to be involved, and you can drive it. And we've seen it, right? Maybe we could, Nick, maybe we should think about talking about a couple examples, just for the audience of some very successful, publicly owned broadband networks. It's not necessarily that it always has to be open access. It really just has to have a good plan, and ultimately that gets them to sustainability. I mean, we always talk about Longmont, Colorado, right? Nextlight, and it's a Muni-owned network. They compete against two tier ones, Comcast and CenturyLink Lumen, whatever they are at the moment. I think they're actually both. And they have over 60% penetration, right? But it's affordability. They're very, very affordable. They've figured out how to partner with their power company to reduce the cost anywhere power goes for new builds. It's still a very growing and thriving community. They go in and they partner with that entity, and so they don't have the additional cost for broadband. Whenever they're putting the power line in, they're obviously building the fiber network at the same time. They're collaborating with another unit that's municipal owned, right? And so I don't know. I think we should talk about. I personally get a little frustrated with the conversation going too long on policy, because this is the world that really I just don't know if I could, handle it myself, Gigi. And we're so happy that someone like yourself is out there, because it is very frustrating. It's super hard, but there are communities winning. Stories
are really important. Stories about, and AAPB, we're starting to do that. We did in our last newsletter. We featured Travis Light and Power, Travis City Light and Power, which is run by one of our board members, Scott Menhart. And we're going to continue to highlight successful communities. And also in the handbook we put out, Own Your Internet, we also, I think I've had a half a dozen successful communities. We've also just launched a mentorship program for those communities. Brian, you talked about fear. And to me, fear of risk is what is holding back the public broadband sector. People know it's a way to universal, affordable broadband. And I think what people will find once the BEAD program is over is that BEAD did not save them.
Exactly.
Right? Particularly if you're in a suburban or urban areas, and that you've got to look at other alternatives, because, look, I have no problem. I'm a capitalist, like Kamala Harris says, and incumbents are just not going to build in certain areas. And that's where public broadband really kind of comes in. And one of the things AAPB wants to be for people is the place where we can say, you can do it. We will connect you with folks who have done it. You can finance it. You can, there's several different models, including the open access model that you guys, are so involved in, but there are public-private partnerships. There's a utility model. You can do it. It just takes leadership. And again, it takes vision and it takes courage. So that I'm sticking with those two things for today, vision and courage.
Outside of the vision and courage, which obviously we need in abundance in the world, as I know we're about running out of time, but what's the one, if you had to have another superpower, or you think you could gift a superpower to anyone to help move things forward, what would it be besides the vision and leadership?
Well, I think also patience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yes.
these networks don't get built in a day. I tell advocates, people who sort of see my career and say, oh, I'd love to do what you're doing. What's your advice? And I say, if you're looking for a quick victory, go do something else. Play pickleball.
Yes, run.
Play pickleball, do something, be a bankruptcy lawyer, right? I mean, getting universal connectivity in a market that unfortunately, is very consolidated and has a lot of very powerful incumbent players. Getting to that vision of universal, affordable, robust connectivity, it takes time. Now, I'm still bullish on the fact that we'll do it. Like, Brian, you mentioned electrification. We did it very differently in this country. Like with electrification, we started out with the public model, and then many, many, many years later, we said, okay, private entities, you can participate. We've done the opposite here. And I think it was a mistake, but it's like too late, right? I mean,
Right.
we're not going to tell Comcast and Verizon, sorry, you're out. So we're doing it backwards here. But I think people should look to rural electrification as a model for what can be done at the community level
100%.
and move forward that way.
100%.
Do you think we should be more try to drive the conversation to be more direct instead of maybe kind of just dancing around some of the topics? Should we be more bullish? Should we have more direct conversations at all levels?
Yes. And that includes, by the way, and I think I'm pretty good at this, pushing back on the folks who will do anything in their power to stop public broadband from being a thing. And that's one of the reasons why we created the mentorship program, one of the reasons why we did the handbook, because we want to grow the field, right? There's 450 networks that serve about 700 communities. That's not nearly enough, right? We want to double the number of people served by public broadband in the next 5 years. And how do you do that? Again, is you give people the information they need to move forward, and you stop the detractors from throwing up not only policy and legal and economic barriers, but just PR barriers. So far, I mean, I think we blocked those initiatives in about 6 or 7 different states just in the first year of my being the head of AAPB, and it will not stop. Trust me, it will not stop. So we got to play offense and we got to play defense.
We need good marketing to counteract the bad marketing.
Right, and we have to demystify, right? And we have to demystify public broadband. It is a not insurmountable thing to do. And I think, this is something that all of us who are such advocates for the various public broadband models need to keep hitting on.
Well, Gigi, I think that's a great point to end on. I can't thank you enough for one, being a broadband hero. We greatly appreciate you. We greatly appreciate the work you've done, and as well as with Brian and Jade. So thank you again for being on. For those who are listening or watching, you can pick us up on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can look for us on our next episode. Thanks again, Gigi, Brian, and Jade.
Thank you.
My pleasure. This was great. Thank you.
A lot of fun.